Hello, this is Colleen Clemenson, SANDAG Planning Director, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today to learn about our Shared Streets pilot program that we are offering to our local jurisdictions in the San Diego region. As we get started, just a few things I wanted to let everyone know that your microphones are muted. That's by default. There's no need to touch the microphone icon. We'll provide an overview of the program first, and then we'll explain how you can submit questions during the discussion period. And for reference, this webinar will be recorded, and both recording and the PowerPoint slides will be posted online so you can refer back to it as needed. So a look at the agenda for today. We're going to provide an overview of the pilot program. We want to be really clear about the application process. Our goal is to make this application process as simple as possible so that we can get funding out the door as soon as possible to all of you to start implementing projects. We're going to give some examples of some pilot projects that you might want to consider. Many of you probably know that the city of San Diego started a Slow Streets program about 10 or so days ago. And the city of San Diego staff is going to share with you some of the things they're doing. And then we also will run through some things that are happening in other cities and locations actually throughout the world. And hopefully that will give all of you some inspiration. We want to try to keep that piece short and allow as much time as possible for questions and answers. So just as we kind of get started here, the SANDAG last Friday, we released the Shared Streets pilot program. And the goal here is to repurpose funding that would have been used for Bike to Work Day, which, believe it or not, is today. And to repurpose that funding in a way to support our local communities and local jurisdictions in light of the current public health crisis. A key goal is to provide safe places for residents to keep a safe distance from one another while obtaining essential goods, services, and also getting physical exercise. The pilot program will award up to $5,000 to each jurisdiction in the region. This is not competitive funding. Each jurisdiction in the region is eligible to claim the funding. And one really important distinction, because we've had some questions about this is not for planning shared streets, it must be for implementation. So the cost of putting out signs or barriers, it's really specific to the implementation. A high-level kind of overview, and we will get into a little bit more detail. Shared streets are really temporary improvements that create safe and healthy spaces for people of all ages and abilities to bike, walk, run, scoot, and even more during the COVID-19 pandemic. These improvements can also support local economic recovery efforts, and examples are safe spaces for restaurants to maybe expand outside their building for further distancing, safe distancing for patrons. Similar programs are rolling out across the globe in response to COVID-19 to support physical health and local economic needs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to SANDAG's Marissa Mangdon, who will provide an overview of the application process. Marissa.
Thanks a lot, Colleen, and hi everyone. I'm a planner here at SANDAG, helping to administer this new pilot program. I'll start by breaking down the request for applications process. We've tried to make it as straightforward and painless as possible. As Colleen mentioned, all 19 jurisdictions are eligible to apply for funding by Friday, May 22nd. We realize jurisdictions are stretched thin during this time, so you may partner with a nonprofit, advocacy, or community-based organization to help implement the project by June 30th. Some eligible expenses include materials like temporary barriers coupled with signage that may be necessary for traffic control. in addition to consultant fees, municipal staff time, or related expenses to develop traffic control plans if those are required, or to produce and install signage and other promotional materials. One important thing to note is that our funding source can only support project implementation, not planning efforts, just reiterating what Colleen mentioned, and only traffic control plans are permitted. All SANDAG funds received must be used to implement physical alterations to streets on or before June 30th. However, expenses that help extend the life of any existing shared streets improvements could also be permitted. So for example, the City of San Diego already have implementing some couple of miles of shared or slow streets. This funding could help them extend the life of those temporary alterations. We've heard that City of Oceanside, for example, has done a little bit of work with temporary improvements to the Strand. And so that could help to extend those processes. The application itself is a 3-page fillable PDF to describe the proposed improvements, specific project locations, and estimated budget. We've provided a handy table to log all estimated expenses. We also realize not all jurisdictions will submit applications, so we've built in a contingency strategy to distribute any remaining funds to jurisdictions that express an interest. A field within the application has been provided to describe how the supplemental funds could be used. It's entirely up to each jurisdiction as to whether supplemental funding would build upon a proposed pilot described in the application or fund a new idea. Following pilot project implementation, each jurisdiction must submit a final report by July 31st, summarizing the pilot's activities, any challenges and successes, and estimated impact. An itemized invoice with copies of all receipts and at least 15 photos of the pilot are required. And we'll also need copies of any press releases or other materials used to promote the project. SANDAG's very active on social media, so tagging us in posts is highly encouraged. We'll provide a kind of handy list of key dates on the next slide here. As questions are received through May 18th, we'll be adding them to a frequently asked questions document that'll be posted online the following day. Award notifications will be sent out to all applicants by Friday, May 29th, and we'll work quickly to execute agreements with each jurisdiction in June. Given the June 30th implementation deadline, jurisdictions may move forward with pilot purchases upon receiving the award notification. The application, sample agreement, and a variety of resources are already posted to the pilot program website, including a helpful summary of what other cities are doing. I'd like to quickly run through some examples of eligible project types listed in the request for applications, starting with closing or limiting through traffic on residential streets or streets connecting to parks. Residents returning home and commercial deliveries are permitted while supplying residents with safe space to bike, walk, rollerblade, dance, you name it. Oakland and Philadelphia are two of many cities implementing these temporary closures, and it seems to be the most popular option so far. Another eligible pilot option is widening walkways. This type of street modification is proving vital as more residents need space to walk for exercise or complete their essential trips. These graphics from Portland demonstrate how temporary walkways could be sited on streets with narrow to no sidewalks. As more people need to queue in line for the pickup of essential goods, this tactic helps every walker maintain a safe distance. Wider walkways could be combined with other strategies to create shared streets with essential businesses as well. The image on the left is an example from Tampa. Note the expanded dining area coupled with space on street for walking and biking. And the Portland graphic on the right maintains the sidewalk for walking while temporarily reallocating space on street for safe patron queuing and allowing delivery or mobile retail services to stage. In terms of bikeways, you might consider choosing locations to expand bike lane width for safer passing, or even create pop-up bike lanes on key roads where there's less vehicular demand for the curb space. Minneapolis got creative a few years ago using plywood planters as bike lane barriers, for example. Last and certainly not least is signage. Ensuring cyclists, pedestrians, and drivers are all aware of the new temporary conditions in place is key. Samples from Vermont and Alameda provide some nice inspiration. And don't forget electronic signage. That might be a good fit for some roadways. I'll pass it over to Alyssa Muto, Deputy Director of Environment and Mobility Planning at the City of San Diego, to share highlights about their Slow Streets program.
Great. Thank you so much, Marissa. Thank you, Colleen, and SANDAG. Thank you in general for just making these funds available. Our slow streets and opportunities like this for increased physical distancing are so important for our residents, our businesses, and all of the people that just need that respite when they get out and about. So we have done thus far in our phase 1, 3 streets. You'll see here we did Diamond Street from Mission Boulevard to Olney, with a break at Ingram because of the signalized intersection. Normal Heights at the Adams Avenue over the I-805, and North Park along Howard. We're hoping to extend on Orange in a subsequent phase. So I'll talk a little bit about the our expanded sidewalks, which is what you see here. So Adams Avenue had a pinch point over the freeway. As we know, freeway sidewalks, overpass sidewalks are a little bit more narrow. And we were observing, as you can see on the left, a lot of people were already walking in the parking lane. So instead of forcing people to walk into traffic, what we did was we put out no parking signs and were able to close down the parking lane. It wasn't being utilized because the business districts weren't seeing as many people needing long-term parking or even short-term parking. So it was a perfect opportunity to address this condition. Next slide. So the slow streets are probably a little bit trickier, and this is where I want to try to give as many tips and tricks for you as you look at your own jurisdictions and what you can do. So as I mentioned, we've done Diamond Street, we have done Howard Street in our uptown or North Park areas, and we're also looking at additional streets in one of our other council districts presently to conclude phase 1, and then we are starting to put together what we want to do in phase 2. So some of the tips are working with your advocates and your communities are so important, and your elected officials. Building that coalition and finding the right streets for the community. It's not anticipated to be a draw for others to come and visit and use. It's really about serving that community, getting to essential jobs and services, and also getting that time outside for recreation, both mental and physical. Also looking at streets that have some characteristics. So one of the recommended streets was University. It is a high volume roadway. It has a lot of transit use with our BRT along that roadway. So what we did was we looked for a roadway that was parallel, that had less than 35 mph posted speed limits, could provide that essential access to essential jobs and services, and then also just gave that neighborhood a place of respite. So that is where we came upon the Howard alignment. It was a good alternative, and checking back with the community and the council member, we have had great success there. Similarly with Diamond provides access not only to the neighborhoods, but just a couple streets over is our commercial area. The last thing is we've been able to capitalize on this by getting opportunities for surveying. So as people are going onto our website to find out a little bit more about slow streets, we created a very simple to use slow street survey. Please take a look for yourself, especially if you get a chance to check out our slow streets to give some feedback. It is a great way to capture input during a time as our trends are changing and we're moving around in a different way. So with that, I'll be available to answer questions. Everett Hauser, also from my counterpart in our Transportation Engineering Operations Division, is also here today to answer questions. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. We'll now hand it over to Josh Clark, fellow SANDAG planner, to share some more inspirational shared street examples from other places.
Yeah, oh, sorry, cutting here. I think my audio connection is falling in and out, so sorry. I'll pick it up from here. Thank you, Marissa. My name is Josh Clark. I'm an active transportation planner at SANDAG, and so I can step through a couple of these inspiration city examples. There were plenty in just the United States to choose from. So we have the first one here. This is actually just a screenshot from a video clip that was on Twitter. It's about a 15-second clip from someone rolling by on their bike, capturing this street symphony, social distance street symphony that's taking place in Providence, Rhode Island. And let's talk about an example here in Oakland, which truly any conversation about peer cities and slow street projects in this COVID-19 era should start with Oakland. On March 17th, the County of Alameda had their shelter-in-place orders, and the City of Oakland immediately started to look at how to encourage safe physical distancing. So they referenced their bicycle master plan, which you can see in this map, the next slide here. The bicycle master plan, sorry, let's go back one slide if you don't mind. The bicycle master plan you can see these purple features here are the existing class 3 signed routes or existing bicycle boulevard routes and the proposed routes as well. So looking at that network, sorry, next slide, they start to sketch out the initial makings of a slow streets program, which are 5 miles implemented on April 11th and then an additional 5 miles on the 17th. They have instituted 5 miles every week since, and it's important to note that they announced the project on April 10th and then began implementing their soft closures just the very next day. Excellent, next slide please. You can see that they continue to get feedback as well on all of these slow streets, and so this interactive mapping tool has been, I'm sure, quite useful for them, and they've cataloged a lot of this feedback and make it available on their website. All right. So I realize that I've made reference already to a couple of typology terms for bikeways. So I wanted to just pause here and say that we have the class 3 route, which are typically your signed routes. You can see with bikeway signage, and often you'll see a shared lane marking in this configuration as well. And the other bikeway facility type, here we just see the Caltrans HDM codified bikeways. But on the next slide, we have a bikeway facility type that I've referenced, which is the bike boulevard. And this bicycle boulevard is typically the treatment and facility type that we're seeing installed to create the temporary installations to create a bikeway facility, which is the shared streets configuration. We see here this image is from NACTO and specifically relates to the partial closure to create a lower speed, lower volume corridor. All right, and then back to Oakland here, we have the text from NACTO, and you can see that the signage here is creating this partial closure and creating people with this corridor to feel comfortable riding, recreating, slow modes, all wheeled activities here. And the two references hyperlinked here are available on the SANDAG Slow Streets website. Not only do we have the NACTO portion of the bicycle boulevard linked here, but also a small town and rural design guide, which might be more helpful for the context of your specific agencies. And in the next slide, we can see that a key component of bicycle boulevards is signage. And with Oakland's quick rollout, you can see in the distance that they've got the standard MUTC signage at that intersection, but it's interesting that residents decided they should fill a need with some additional signage here. And this signage, interestingly, was kind of more formalized by local advocates. The Bike East Bay printed this really cool flyer that was used at each of the intersections. You can see that a black and white version of that flyer is printed and put on the back of this like Fisher-Price backboard here. So next slide, please. And then across the bay, we're going to look at San Francisco, who's keeping a close eye on what Oakland was doing, and interestingly implemented a very similar configuration with some full closures in parks. That's these lighter sort of pink line features. And then you can see the same thing. They started with a small network and built it out with the next phase of implementation. Next slide, please. Going north, we see Portland has done a very similar configuration as well, and they've got their own custom signage. And interestingly, on the Portland site, they actually have these 3 diagrams. So it's quite useful to see how they're adapting this partial closure for different street widths, and you can see, for example, treatment C here is shown with the visualization at right. And next slide. Another very important note about Portland is that they have been looking to eventually harden a lot of these temporary installations. This is on their neighborhood greenway, which is another term for a bicycle boulevard. On their network of about 100 miles, they're looking at those proposed bicycle boulevards or neighborhood greenways and looking at how they could eventually do a second phase, which hardens those to make them more physical, long-term permanent features. Next slide. So we'll go to Seattle now. Seattle's done basically everything that we've just described, including the full closures in the park, custom signage, and partial closures. For example, with this middle segment of the image at left, removes the parking lane and reserves it for people walking, as Alyssa just described earlier. And so you may have heard the next portion here of the Seattle slide that Seattle has decided to permanently close 20 miles of residential streets. And looking more closely at the fine print, it just means that these partial closures are going to continue after the stay-at-home shelter-in-place order. So Seattle is sort of like Portland, seeing that there's going to be a long-term advantage to this for the foreseeable future to continue to have some of these core slow or shared street configurations implemented for a longer term. Right, next slide. So I appreciated this slide from Nashville. Obviously, you know, Seattle is kind of peerless in many respects, but Nashville, like Oakland, moved very quickly recently to do a closure. So they announced their closure, and then the next day they started to implement their 4.5 miles of closures. I really appreciated that they had just used a Google Maps screenshot and some Microsoft Office applications to sketch out their diagrams. And so kudos to Nashville and their 3 planning, public works, and mayor's offices for working together on that collaboration. And the next slide. This is getting back to the configuration where some socially distant, observant sort of configurations for retail and restaurants is created with a lot of the same materials. And it's important to note that this example from Tampa comes from a full guide which they created, which your chambers of commerce or business improvement districts might find quite helpful to use as a reference. And also note that the funding for this SANDAG Shared Streets pilot program does come from the Bike Month and Bike to Work Day historic grant application and funding program. And so what we would be looking for in an example like this would be where that section between the center line marking and the barriers for the restaurant patrons would in fact be a partial closure as well, for example, so that some slow modes are feeling comfortable to use that space as well. All right, excellent. So that takes me through my section with peer city examples, and I think we can open it up for Q&A at this point.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Josh. We've kind of ended here a little earlier than expected, which means we have a lot of time left for any questions, in addition to accepting any comments. You know, so far we have received some questions submitted to us via email regarding, you know, does this application need city council approval? As one example, you know, we're allowing a city manager or anyone with that level of authority to submit the application and then execute the agreement. So it really is up to each city to determine what their process would be to approve the application, submit, and get an agreement executed for the funding in June. Another question that's come in is regarding what about tribal organizations? Can they apply? You know, this grant program is allowing only the 19 jurisdictions to submit the applications and claim the funding, but they can certainly partner with organizations, including tribes. And so that could be an option for the County of San Diego to consider as an example. And another question that's come into us before the webinar here is whether or not our funding can be combined with other municipal funding that's available, for example, CDBG funds. That can certainly occur. We just ask that this funding that's awarded through the Shared Streets pilot program is used to fund all project implementation and not any other type of planning or unrelated work. So cities will have to kind of determine how they can parse out how each funding source could fund whichever type of effort as it's applicable. Looks like we have some questions coming in. First was regarding federal tribes, which we've addressed, but if you need more clarification, let us know. The next question here, if a city has a need for more than 5,000, should we integrate this into our application, i.e. request more than 5K? So 5K is the minimum amount that each jurisdiction can claim if all 19 jurisdictions were to request the funding. And we have included a section within our application for what we're calling quote unquote supplemental funding opportunities. So in the same application, in addition to describing how you would use the $5,000, we also encourage you to share if more funding is available, either because all jurisdictions don't claim the 5K or we have just some available that you describe what other project you would do. How would you maybe expand the proposed project in the application, or provide a whole new idea for a different type of eligible project that's different from what you proposed in the kind of budget table. So we can take ideas for supplemental funds, and we want it all captured within the same application. Welcome, Josh, or anyone else online to clarify or add more detail.
So this is
Marissa, what I'd like to add, this is Colleen, what I'd like to add is that the whole idea there is that we want all of this funding used. So if in the supplemental you can say, you know, we would do these 3 streets for $5,000, and if we had another 5,000, we would do these, you know, we do 2 more streets or 2 additional things. And the reason for that is we want to simplify this application process as much as possible. So again, we wouldn't be asking for a whole new application. If we have additional funding available, we want to get it out to you. So that's really the goal up front.
This is Alyssa. I thought I would just take a moment to share with you what the cost is for what we've done so far. So for the materials of the all-weather reflective signs, so they could be out 24 hours, plus the labor would be just about $10,000, and that was again for 4 streets in our phase 1. So just to give people a kind of a size and scale of what that means. We did not need to purchase any barricades for that, just the signs. So in our next phase, we are looking at the need to purchase barricades, so adding some more cost. And for each barricade, we had 2 signs. We have 2 signs. One is a closed to through traffic, and then the second is a yellow sign allowing for or recognizing that bikes and pedestrians are permitted in that area.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Alyssa. And I'm sure, you know, fellow cities are going to have similar questions like that either during this webinar or afterwards. Is the city of San Diego exploring any other types of eligible projects like we've described besides some of the residential street closures already in play?
I think that there are opportunities. So we are working on some zoning changes to allow for more flexibility for our restaurants, so similar to one of the last examples that Josh presented. And that might result in some commercial corridors that want to do a single lane closure one side of the street to allow for more space for physical distancing and or outside uses where those retail spaces can spill out into exterior areas. So that's an opportunity that we are really considering, but I think right now we have 9 council districts and we only have about 3 or 4 that are covered. So we're looking to try to see if we can add more in other council districts first before we look to what other types of opportunities.
And any other information that comes to mind other than what you've already shared about kind of the strategy in selecting some of the streets? I mean, you shared streets parallel to some of the busier corridors with certain speed limits. When it comes to thinking about new ways of reallocating street space, either in business districts or other places, what else is coming to mind in terms of that selection criteria that can help get some of these other cities motivated to think about them in the same way?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely the commercial corridors. We don't have one yet, but we have some commercial areas that are interested. I think they're putting together some ideas. I think there's always the concern that if you prohibit cars along the frontage, that could affect or further affect, especially right now with the stay-at-home order, business revenues and opportunities for those businesses to maintain their stream of income. So it might just be a one-way closure. Maybe it's a limited use of the parking lanes. We are seeing in other areas that may be similar to the overpass on Adams Avenue. There might be a less utilization of parking because of folks not needing to park for jobs during the day. And so that might actually free up a parking lane. And then, you know, really, again, it's so important to communicate with those communities, with the elected officials who really know those neighbors that would be experiencing the slow streets, and making sure that it really supports their communities. One other thing I should note is we don't have these manned with law enforcement. It's not a law enforcement activity, and I think that's a really important piece. We frequently monitor the roadways. We have our work plans that allow us to verify that the signage is in the right place with various individuals within the city who are capable of doing those inspection services. Maybe they can't do them presently due to the stay-at-home order, so they could be reassigned. Or others that are interested in stepping in and doing some outdoor activity might be able to also work that into their workday. And then, but the police enforcement, what we found, is not necessary. The signage is pretty straightforward, and it does allow for the continued residential access, commercial deliveries, and emergency access at all times. So that's, I think, a really important piece of the information. And I did have some calls within the first day or two of one of our streets closing of an adjacent roadway where neighbors felt there were greater car trips on their roadway, and I asked them to just, you know, check it out for a week. We were doing some monitoring, and to get back to me, and I haven't heard back after a week. So I think it just needed some time to adjust, the traffic flows adjust, and those bypass trips have evened out.
That's so helpful to hear, Alyssa, and that's what I've been picking up on as well, is that these, once they're implemented, don't get retracted. It seems that once that there is some adjustment period, but that these networks are only getting larger in each of the peer cities.
It's definitely some great opportunities for us to not only support what our communities are experiencing, where they are experiencing their neighbors and their neighborhoods, maybe for the first time, by walking and biking, where maybe they didn't have the time before. They were busy picking their dog up from the doggy daycare, or taking their kids to a soccer practice at night, and never really had time after those work hours to get outside as a family. And so there are a lot of folks that are unexperienced and need some space to build that confidence in our rights of way, and just to get out and like I said, that mental and physical respite of getting out of the house and getting outdoors.
Hi, everyone. This is Everett here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
I was just going to add on to the question of how the streets were selected. So all the streets are within our Class 3 bicycle network, as Josh alluded to, and building off again the Oakland example of previous community engagement. So the beautiful PB group has a network of PB pathways, and Diamond Street was one of those identified to be implemented. And so that's why Diamond Street was a leading candidate for the slow street. Similarly, as we were looking toward the mid-city area, Howard is a bike boulevard, It's going to be eventually part of the SANDAG early action program, but it's still a couple months out from construction. We were also looking at Landis Street as a good candidate, but that one was going to be commencing construction very soon. So just building off of what's been previously approved in your community or city and what would have good support was something that was a key factor for us, knowing that these streets have already been vetted with the community at some level, or there's a plan for future improvements, and this is can be a preview of what that change is going to look like.
That's really helpful, Everett. Any other feedback that's been received from the community? I know you have the online survey, and of course, I'm sure folks are calling council members and even maybe your office. Any feedback that's helped prompting other new ideas to implement as part of the shared streets pilot, or maybe to think about in terms of more permanent improvements later on?
I'll jump in there. So I've seen the results of our survey, and they are looking pretty good, even by people who haven't been on the street itself. I think overall it was just a big part to accomplish the rollout, so that way we could join the other cities around the nation to say we've got something in play, and then to learn from it and show that when we make these changes, people benefit from them and they're not so disruptive as others can think. And then as Liz mentioned, there, from the examples around the country, there's going to be a lot of other ideas for more modifications within the right of way, for expanded sidewalk dining, for the pickup and delivery zones. So if you haven't seen it, and it wasn't captured in our presentation today, but the Uptown Parking District in Hillcrest has created a sign to reserve some meter spots for quickly picking up at businesses in that community. So just like everything, we're observing what's happening, and we'll remain responsive to try to meet the needs of what the communities want.
And that's also working with with the council members, with your elected officials who probably more readily hear, and again, supporting them with the data that you can gather from things like the survey or just your own correspondence with the communities.
Hey, Alyssa and Everett, I apologize, but since you have such experience with this, I wondered if you could speak a little bit more to the process that led up to the mayor's announcement that the slow streets would roll out. I mean, that was kind of the public facing, but I, for example, don't know a lot about what steps were being taken procedurally before that announcement was made last month.
Yeah, so it was definitely a multi-department effort. Just one moment. And between our sustainability department, planning, and our transportation stormwater department to have that multidisciplinary team to figure out, okay, how do we do this? One of the big things that I think is so important in that conversation, usually we say, should we do it, yes or no? And just getting through that first question is a really hard question when you have so many competing priorities. So we did get to a point that we took that question off the table just for the time being of should we do it? And then we were able to say, okay, now how do we do it? And I think if you can just, even if you don't know the real answer politically of should we do it or not, if you can put that aside and then talk about the how to, that's a really important step in just making something like this happen, this kind of almost tactical urbanism as we see it in at a public level or at a citizen level. From there, we worked closely to vet all the streets from the engineering perspective, as well as touching back with our advocates who have been such strong supporters and, you know, really encouraging us to move forward with the slow streets. And then how do we roll it out? And we thought it was very important that during those times that the mayor is really engaging with our city, with the city of San Diego residents, that he take the time to, and it was important to him, to talk about the idea of slow streets and all that we're doing. And so we really put it into a greater consideration of that physical distancing and the COVID pandemic. And we talked about the, in that press conference, the changing our old style of push buttons at our street lights to be the larger ADA compliant style, so that you can just use your arm, your backside, a piece of paper to, you know, really hit the button and cross the street on demand, instead of, because there are trade-offs to just turning them off. And many of the folks here probably on the call know those trade-offs. We also talked about maintaining our commuter bikeways, so those bike highways in the region, those that parallel our freeways. That was really important to just reiterate and make sure people knew that that was happening. And then pairing that with the slow streets, it was really a concerted effort. We did a lot of social media outreach as well. And then one thing that I've heard back, and I think it was a good thing that we're working on now, is informational signage. So it wasn't essential when we needed to roll it out, but now we're creating those signs like you saw in many of the images that Josh presented of what slow streets are. Our plan is to do them both in English and in Spanish, and to first do them in paper, really low cost, putting them in a plastic sleeve and pasting them out there around the slow streets. And then maybe if we find a partner, we probably won't use the SANDAG money for this so that we can do more streets. But if we can find a partner to work with, one of our nonprofits who want to print it on maybe a corrugated plastic, that's also something that we're hoping to upgrade, because those could be used in long term. And maybe this becomes a program in the city as well to work through and around our communities at different times of the month and the year to offer slow streets.
One other question that's come in is regarding the city's survey. Are those results going to be shared either with the public or at least the survey participants?
I believe that we'll put that together in some sort of a easy dashboard of information, and make that all present. It's, you know, we definitely want to be transparent and share that information with everyone. It's only been launched for a little bit less than a week. I think it got launched late last week. So hopefully we'll start to get some good data over the next week or two.
Okay, and clarifying a question from earlier that was specific to tribal lands, not just about partnering, but seeing if the improvements can be made on tribal lands. That's something I think we'll have to clarify as quickly as possible, and get back to the person that asked, and we can make a point to do that. But yeah, we can go ahead and start wrapping up unless there's any other questions or comments that people have. And I'll hand it over to Colleen.
Thank you. I really want to thank the SANDAG team who helped put this together in just a matter of days. Marissa Mangden, thank you to you. You saw a need and you made it happen. And Josh Clark, really an issue area expert in active transportation. And then Janet Besant, who is one of our senior contract folks who came up with a template and made it as simple as possible. So all of these materials are posted at sandag.org, shared streets. We thank all of you for tuning in, and we really, really encourage you all to put in applications, get projects out there, and whatever support any of us at SANDAG can provide to you to help make that happen, we are here for you. A big thank you to the City of San Diego for being out on the forefront and for joining us here today and already able to share lessons learned on these important programs that will help support bicyclists, pedestrians, economic recovery, and so forth. So thank you all. Enjoy your afternoon. Take care.